This is CBC News. Good afternoon. I'm Rosanna Hempel. At 12 o'clock, it's +2 in Winnipeg. Clearing up this afternoon, a high of +4. People across Manitoba gathered this past hour to remember those who sacrificed for freedom in Canada. The largest Remembrance Day service was at RBC Convention Centre. Padre Anton Sloboda thanked those who have served.
We come together today filled with inspiration and admiration for those who have given so much. Today is a time to remember that life in Canada, as we know it, is not a given. It is a fruit of the struggles and the sacrifices of the past.
Services were held across Winnipeg and Manitoba today. Many honored the Royal Canadian Air Force, which marked its 100th anniversary this year. Ceremonies are also being held right across the country. In Ottawa, a ceremony at the National War Memorial has just come to a close. Hundreds of people gathered in the capital despite the grey, wet weather. They are still filling the sidewalks now as veterans march away from the memorial in a parade. Here's Brigadier General Guy Delisle.
In a spirit of peace and gratitude, this moment prompts us to reflect on the sacrifices of our heroes and their families.
Governor General Mary Simon is there wearing an Air Force uniform that is meant to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Royal Canadian Air Force. This year is also the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Legions across Manitoba are busy today with events marking Remembrance Day. Leighton Peters is active in the Gladstone Legion. He says no matter what you believe, Remembrance Day is an important way to thank past and current members of the military.
Regardless of the things that are going on and the war and the strife that is happening, these people still sacrificed and did things in the past that have allowed us to continue to help these other people and cultures and other countries around the world that need our help.
While Peter says legions are there for veterans, they also bring the greater community together. He says since Gladstone's hotel burned, the town's legion has become the community gathering place. Canadian troops in Latvia are marking Remembrance Day with a ceremony and parade. There are about 1,600 Canadians there serving with NATO. They are part of a training mission dubbed Operation Reassurance. Dominic Velitis has more from Riga.
Camp Ardegi in Latvia and Canadian soldiers based here pause to remember those who've paid the ultimate sacrifice. Hundreds took part in the event, which was attended by Canada's ambassador to Latvia, Brian Schwark. As well as the sounding of the last post, wreaths were laid by representatives of the 13 countries which make up the Canadian-led NATO multinational brigade based here. Canadian troops are in Latvia under Operation Reassurance, the Canadian Armed Forces' largest overseas mission and part of the alliance's response to Russian aggression in Ukraine. They've been training hard during their time in the Baltics and have just completed their first overseas brigade-level field exercise for 30 years. Today, though, was about remembering those lost to war in defence of their country. Dominic Velitis for CBC News, Riga, Latvia.
Back in Manitoba, Winnipeg's professional basketball team is worried about one of its players. The Winnipeg Sea Bears says during a training session, Chad Posthumus suffered a brain aneurysm. The team says the 33-year-old Winnipeg-born player is in hospital in stable condition, but will require extra medical care. A labour dispute at the Port of Montreal is heating up. About 1,200 dock workers are now locked out by their employer, bringing most activity at Canada's second busiest port to a halt. The CBC's Rowan Kennedy has more.
The Port of Montreal's terminals are at a standstill. 2 cargo ships of merchandise are frozen. The workers who unload them are locked out. The Maritime Employers Association imposed the measure last night after the dock workers rejected the latest offer. Port spokesperson Mélanie Nadeau says the work stoppage could lead to $90 million in losses every day.
We would see trains going and coming from the terminals for import and exports. We would see a lot of trucks here on the port road. Nothing's moving right now.
At the Dock Workers Union headquarters, spokesperson Michel Murray blames the employers. He says the union is willing to go back to the bargaining table, but they refuse to negotiate. The Maritime Employers Association says it had no choice but to impose a lockout and wants Ottawa to step in. In a statement, Federal Labour Minister Stephen McKinnon says Canadians are counting on the parties involved to come up with a deal at the bargaining table. Rowan Kennedy, CBC News, Montreal.
And that is the CBC News from Winnipeg. Your next local CBC News is at 12:30.
Good afternoon and welcome to Radio Noon for November 11th, Remembrance Day. And of course, today on the show, we will be focusing on remembering our fallen heroes and those that gave their lives. And actually, after our 12:30 news, we are hoping you will share your memories of family members who fought for freedom in the wars. And we will meet a man who's developed an app that can bring those stories to life, because lots of us have photographs or letters, but it's hard to know how to preserve and present them. So give us a call, 204-588-7355 to text, or 204-780-0893. That's after the 12:30 news with your memories. And a Remembrance Day ceremony is on right now at the RBC Convention Centre. Thousands of people are in attendance. Here is Padre Anton Sloboda, the 17-wing chaplain, who spoke about D-Day.
Good morning. Tanse bonjour. Ho, Tanche, bonjour. 80 years ago, last June 6th, common men from Canada trod those sacrificial ways on the coast of France. The Nazis had 33 divisions waiting for them in Normandy, and it was a bloodbath. Since 1867, more than 120,000 Canadians have made that ultimate sacrifice in our wars and in our peacekeeping operations. Now, speaking of selfless service, come back with me to the night of June 5th, 1944, where 150,000 men were at sea in the English Channel, many of them seasick, all of them loaded and ready to hit the beaches of Normandy in the morning. This vast army was carried by an Allied flotilla of something like 7,000 ships and vessels, including 109 ships already mentioned, and 10,000 sailors from the Royal Canadian Navy. Overhead, during the night, flew 12,000 bombers and fighters working to soften up the German defenses, including Lancasters of the No. 6 Bomber Group and fighters of the Royal Canadian Air Force, this year celebrating a century of service to Canada and to the world. In the darkness, below the fighters and the bombers flew almost 1,000 Douglas Dakotas, carrying paratroops and pulling gliders loaded with soldiers, 24,000 of them in total. With them was the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion. All of them would land under fire, in the dark, behind German lines, before the others hit the beaches after sunrise. With the airborne that night was an Anglican padre, a priest from Winnipeg, a chaplain, unarmed, Captain George Alexander Harris. He volunteered. He left his safe and comfortable post at All Saints Anglican Church, not far from here, at Osborne and Broadway, And that night, with the battalion, he jumped out of a C-47 with all the others. With many others. He was dead before the day was done. We will remember them. Once the sun was up, all those seaborne troops were to land on 5 different Normandy beaches. The Canadian 3rd Division was assigned to Juno Beach. First ashore at Juno that morning were special tanks of the Fort Garry Horse and the 1st Hussars, followed immediately by men from the Royal Winnipeg Rifles and the Regina Rifles. Except many of them didn't even make it to shore. Almost a third of the landing craft were lost to German mine defenses, along with many of the men they carried. Those who made it to shore, they weren't safe either. Despite the massive aerial and naval bombardment overnight, the Wehrmacht and the SS were dug in and ready to welcome the Canadians to France. The war diary put it this way: the bombardment having failed to kill a single German or silence one weapon, these 2 rifle companies, the Royal Winnipeg and the Regina, had to storm their positions cold and did so without hesitation. B Company of the Royal Winnipeg Rifles, coming ashore in the first wave, suffered the worst casualties. By the time they made it off the beach, only the company commander and 26 men were fit for duty. 80%. 80% of them had either been killed or wounded. We will remember them. And so it went. Although 1 Canadian unit, only 1, reached its D-Day objective, the first line of German defenses had been completely smashed. By evening, Canadian troops had progressed further inland than any of their other allies. It was a remarkable achievement. But despite casualties being less than expected, it was an expensive one too. A Canadian journalist reported the German dead were littered over the dunes by the gun positions. By them lay Canadians, blood-stained in battle dress, in the sand and in the grass, on the wire and by the concrete forts. They had lived a few minutes of the victory they had made. That was all. To ensure that D-Day would be a success, 340 Canadians were killed. 574 Canadians were wounded, and 47 were taken prisoner the first day. But the battle for France and the liberation of Western Europe had just begun. The Canadian-Scottish War Diary described the Canadians on D-Day this way: never a wounded man whimpered. The opposite, in fact, was the case, and time and again, badly wounded men had to be ordered back. Jean Huel, a Frenchman who lived very close to the beach and met Canadians early on, told this story. When I went out, suddenly I saw a tall fellow in front of me with a typical English helmet. And I said in English, "Here they are, the Tommies." The young man answered in French, "Je suis Canadien." And so that day, the ghosts of Dieppe were laid to rest. We will remember them, all of them. Today, this day, we are all Canadians. For us, let this day be more than a single time of remembrance. Let it be rather a reminder to remember. May this day encourage us to live lives of service and sacrifice for the good of all, as they did.
God, our help in ages past, art to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. Under the shadow of thy throne, your
We've been listening to 17-wing chaplain Padre Anton Sloboda speaking at Remembrance Day ceremony last hour at the RBC Convention Centre.
New this month on CBC Gem, two of Canada's longest-running shows are back for their 18th seasons.
You're going to be introduced to a new world.
Murdoch Mysteries brings more intrigue and invention as Detective Murdoch faces new challenges.
I would say it's extremely bad form to arrest your new boss.
And over at Heartland, life on the ranch rolls along at a more relaxed pace.
Looks like Stetson's back to his old self.
Season 18 of Murdoch Mysteries and Heartland. Watch free on CBC Gem.
You're listening to Radio Noon. It's 15 minutes after 12. And coming up after the 12:30 news, we want to know, do you have a story to share about a grandparent or a great-grandparent or aunt or uncle who fought for Canada? On this Remembrance Day, we want you to call and share the stories of your family and friends. And we'll learn about an app that can help you bring those family memories to life. Give us a call, 204-780-0893. I know Marcy was asking for people's stories on Information Radio, and we thought we would just continue. There are so many stories to share. So do give us a call, 204-780-0893. And coming right up, a groundbreaking new report highlights the urgent health needs of aging veterans and offers solutions to make their lives better. Taking a look at Riley Lachuk's forecast today, mostly sunny at the start of this week. Clouds build in tomorrow, ahead of a good chance of showers overnight into Wednesday. And we're looking at some accumulating snow in parts of northern Manitoba again, 5 to 10 centimeters along the Hudson Bay coast, starting on Tuesday morning. Today we're looking at a high of 4 degrees, not quite there yet. Tomorrow in the Winnipeg region, 7, and Wednesday, 8, so it's still not too cold out there. Some temperatures right now. Brandon is -2, Churchill -12, Dauphin -1, in Gimli it's 1, The Paw 0, Thompson -5, and in Winnipeg it's calm and it's 2 degrees. Canada's veteran population is aging. With complex health needs, a new report says they're in dire need of a comprehensive health plan. According to a new report from the National Institute on Aging, 2/3 of the country's vets are now over the age of 55. Many are at risk of worsening health, including chronic pain, post-traumatic stress disorder, and depression. The report is called Coming of Age and Its Related Complexities Among Canada's Veterans. Dr. Madison Bridges is the author of the report. Hello.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Can you describe the main findings of this report?
For sure. So in our report, we discuss how Canada's veteran population is undergoing a significant demographic shift. So about 2/3 are now over the age of 55. And we know that this group of aging veterans are facing more complex mental health and physical health challenges that really require different and new support systems. So really now is the time to be focused on having these conversations and addressing these challenges so we can help in making sure that veterans can age with the right support.
So is it strictly a matter of numbers, or are there specialized regions of healthcare that just haven't been developed?
For sure. Actually, so today's veterans, they're actually primarily those who served after 1954. And this is actually a group that's actually smaller in number, but we know they're experiencing higher rates of several physical and mental health conditions. So for example, when we look at health conditions, we see that veterans who were released from the period between 1998 and 2018, they have prevalence rates of back pain, arthritis, PTSD, anxiety. They're all higher than the average Canadian. We also know about 1 in 4 are living alone. So again, when we're thinking about an aging population, how can we better support this group who might not have access to an unpaid caregiver? So it's both about addressing these new challenges, but also recognize, we do have this strong history of supporting our older veterans. How can we expand and enhance services to really meet these evolving needs?
And these evolving needs, is a lot of it based on their service, or is this just a large aging group that are also veterans? I'm just trying to get at the difference from someone who's not a veteran in terms of their needs.
For sure. So some of these are related to military-specific risk factors. So when we look at things like hearing loss, we know that veterans have much higher rates of hearing loss, about 16%. compared to only 3% of a Canadian of a comparable age and sex. So there are military-specific risk factors that are obviously contributing to some of these things like PTSD, mental health conditions, some physical health conditions. And then again, with that aging lens on, we can start thinking about things like, so will this group have higher or an increased risk of things like frailty or dementia? How can we better support some of these needs and make sure we have the services in place to do that?
And when you mentioned hearing loss, and of course many of these other conditions, it made me think of social isolation. How high is the risk of social isolation for veterans?
So we know that right now about 1 in 4 veterans are living alone. And again, this is higher than the average Canadian. So like you said, we immediately can start thinking about things like, will this group who's living alone, are they more socially isolated? Do they have a higher risk of being lonely? Will they have access to that unpaid caregiver? We know that unpaid caregivers are essential for helping older Canadians age in their homes and communities. So what supports and resources do we need to put in place to make sure this group remains socially connected, make sure they have the services they need to age, where they'd like to?
And how comprehensive was this report in terms of partners?
So we partnered with the Canadian Frailty Network and the Canadian Institute of Military Veteran Health Research. They brought a lot of expertise and support on this project around topics like frailty, around some of Canada's history and legacy of caring for its veterans. So really, this has been an interdisciplinary effort to really determine, what are the needs of this group? What do we need to be thinking about? And how can we now kind of start carving a path forward to develop some of those supports?
You yourself have a background working as a paramedic. What challenges did you see veterans face while you were doing that job?
Yes, so I had spent about a decade working as a paramedic, and to be honest, this report was actually really eye-opening for me. As a healthcare provider, we actually received very little specific education related to veterans, and that's actually something we draw in this report. There's a lot of very contextual and specific information that healthcare providers could learn and have more on that would actually help support this group even more. If we don't have an understanding of what services are in place, then it's really hard to now, if someone is caring for a veteran, how can we refer them to the right services? How can we make sure they're getting those supports? So that I think that's actually an area where Canada can do a lot more and use existing resources that are already out there to make sure that our healthcare workforce is able to not only identify some of these issues, but also connect veterans with the right supports that they need.
So just to summarize, what are the key recommendations to make life better for aging veterans?
For sure. So the first one that we really want to focus on is this need for prevention. We need to start thinking about how can we better support this group? How can we, do more health promotion work? How can we start thinking now about what their needs are in not only currently, but in 10 years and 20 years? So really that first piece is really around that prevention aspect. And then a lot of our recommendations are about expanding and enhancing existing services. We really want there to be a lot more options for older veterans to remain aging in their home and community. So how can we broaden out that existing network that we know exists that actually has some really great supports? How can we just expand and enhance that? And the last piece is about addressing gaps. So we know that we need to do a lot more work on expanding supports for veterans from equity deserving groups. We know we need more access to trauma-informed care, to mental health care, to culturally specific care. So again, it's really about let's figure out, what are those gaps and how can we, in both the short and long term, start working on addressing some of those things.
Well, thank you very much for being with us on Radio Noon.
That's great. Thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Madison Bridges is the lead author on a report called Addressing the Coming of Age and Its Related Complexities Among Canada's Veterans. It's published by the National Institute on Aging. We reached her in Ottawa. You're listening to Radio Noon. It is 24 minutes after 12 o'clock. There's a solemn connection between Manitoba and the Netherlands dating back to the Second World War. A young soldier from Poplarfield named Mike Haluik died there while fighting in the city of Grosbeek for the liberation of the Netherlands in 1944. It's a story that belongs to both places. The RM of Fisher, which includes Poplarfield, has been seeking connections to the fallen soldier's family at the urging of the Dutch city of Grosbeek. We've reached the Reeve of Fisher, Shannon Pysiak, to take up the tale. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Tell us about the letter you received.
We at the municipal office received a letter from the Netherlands from a representative of the Canadian War Cemetery there in Grosbeek, where they honor every year a number of soldiers who are buried there. And in this year in particular, they are honoring a Private Mike Hilyuk from the Poplarfield area in our municipality. They sent out a letter requesting any information that we had to add to the information that they had on their end. And at our council, we decided that we would try and put them in touch with any family members that we could and share the information. And also our CAO, Kelly Merkutsa, posted it on our Facebook page so that if there were family members there that we didn't know about, that they could, if they so chose, to put some information or send some information over to the Netherlands.
And so what's happened since?
I know that some of the extended family members have reached out and shared some information. So we have forwarded whatever we could, as well as forwarded the contact information for people to get in touch with them.
And what was it about Mike Hilyuk's story that was special?
He was, if my recollection is correct, he was the first Canadian soldier who died there.
And was the community in Manitoba aware of his story?
I was not specifically. In all probability, his extended family members were, but I specifically was not. So it was actually a really informative letter and brought back all of the reasons why we need to honor those individuals who have fought for our country on our behalf.
Now, I think that Mike Hilyuk had been mentioned in a community history. Is that true?
You can date some of the information of his family into some of our community history books.
And how surprised were you to get that original letter from the Netherlands?
Very. Period. I was actually personally unaware that that cemetery existed, or the ceremonies that they did every year for those soldiers who are buried there.
Shannon Pysiak is Reeve of Fisher. She read Flanders Fields at a Remembrance Day ceremony in Fisher this morning. In Flanders Fields was composed by Canadian soldier, doctor, and poet John McCrae over a century ago. Here's Leonard Cohen reciting that poem.
In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow. Between the crosses, row on row that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields.
Yes, it's November 11th. It's Remembrance Day, and it brings forth all kinds of memories and emotions. And we would like to hear from you. Do you have a story to share about a grandparent or a great-grandparent or other relative who fought for Canada? On this Remembrance Day, we want you to call and share that story. And we'll learn about an app that can help you bring those family memories to life. Give us a call, 204-780-0893. The news is next.
This is CBC News. Good afternoon. I'm Rosanna Hempel. At 12:30, it's +2 in Winnipeg. Clearing up this afternoon, a high of +4. Winnipeggers mark two important anniversaries during a Remembrance Day service at the Convention Centre.
In Flanders fields, the poppies blow. Between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks still bravely singing fly.
It's the 80th anniversary of D-Day and the 100th anniversary of the Royal Canadian Air Force. Hundreds of people gathered for the service. Reverend Paul Johnson asked the public to remember the former and current wars embattling the world, including the conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine.
Let this day be a powerful symbol that justice is the foundation of true peace. May all those who died, all who have served, and those who serve still, remind us.
Services were held today at Minto Armory, Vimy Ridge Park, and at HMCS Chippewa. At a time when many legions in the province are struggling, one legion is thriving. The Gladstone Legion has become a community hub. Leighton Peters is active in the Legion. He says there was a time when attendance waned, but they found a way to turn it around.
It was struggling at one point, and they started doing Chase the Ace, and it started to bring people in and got more people involved, and it brought our membership numbers back up and helped us support ourselves until we got back to a point where the Legion was, thriving again, running off of its own business. And then all that other stuff is now more membership things, like more for fun than to actually drive and keep the Legion open.
Peters says Gladstone's Legion is especially important as a gathering place since the town's hotel burned down. Winnipeg's professional basketball team is worried about one of its players. The Winnipeg Seabears says during a training session, Chad Posthumus suffered a brain aneurysm. The team says the 33-year-old Winnipeg-born player is in hospital in stable condition, but will require extra medical care. Now to some international news. The Kremlin is denying reports Russian President Vladimir Putin has spoken to Donald Trump on the phone. In fact, it says Putin still has no concrete plans to speak to Trump. The Washington Post first reported a call had happened. It cited unidentified sources who reportedly said Trump told Putin he should not escalate the Ukraine war. And that is the CBC News from Winnipeg. Your next local CBC News is at 1:30.
Thank you, Rosanna.
You're welcome.
Let's take a look at the forecast. In the Winnipeg area today, mostly sunny to start with clouds building in tomorrow. Ahead of good chance of showers on Wednesday and some accumulating snow in parts of northern Manitoba. In Winnipeg, highs of 4 today and down to 7 tonight. And not very windy at all, a little bit out of the south today. And then by Tuesday, picking up a bit, 30 to 50. And in the Brandon region, clearing late this afternoon, winds becoming south 20 and gusting to 40 this afternoon and highs of 5. Few clouds tonight, winds south 30, gusting to 50 and down to -2. In Thompson today, mostly cloudy, not too windy, 15 kilometers an hour, highs of -3. Tonight, a chance of flurries, and the wind will still be steady at 15 and lows of -4. And in Churchill today, cloudy, windy there too, 30 kilometers an hour, but it's lightening up around now. The temperature will fall to -17 this afternoon, and a mainly cloudy night in Churchill, and lows of -19. At this hour in Brandon, it's -2. Churchill is -12. In Dauphin, it's -1. Gimli is 1 degree. The Paw 0. Thompson -5. And Winnipeg haven't reached 4 yet. It's only 2, but it's pretty calm out there. You're listening to Radio Noon. I'm Laurie Hoogstraden. You're at 89.3 FM, 990 AM. And in this call-in part of the show, we want to hear from you on this Remembrance Day. Share your story or your grandparents' story or your great-aunts, uncles' stories of being veterans. And also, we're going to learn about an app that can help you bring family memories to life. But is there a story that's shared among your family members that you wish was, somehow documented? That is the purpose of an app called Memory Anchor. It's a software dedicated to honoring the memories of fallen servicemen and women worldwide. And veteran Ryan Mullins is the co-founder of Memory Anchor, and he joins us by Zoom. Hi, Ryan.
Hi, Lori.
Well, we're going to get to talking about the app, but I also want to say to our listeners how we want to hear from them with the kind of stories that you probably will preserve on the app. So out there in Radio Land, tell us your stories about family members or friends who have sacrificed to fight in the wars. Give us a call, 204-780-0893. Or you can text us at 204-588-7355. And tell us, what did family members do in the war? And what do you have to remember them by, if anything? Do you have letters or photographs? Telegrams? They often sent those very heartrending telegrams in the war. Call us 204-780-0893. And we're going to get to the callers in just a second. But Ryan, I wanted to ask you about this app, Memory Anchor. How did this idea for saving stories digitally come about?
Yeah, well, it kind of goes back to my military history in my family. And I had great-grandfathers in the First World War. One of them actually signed up in Winnipeg and joined the 200th Battalion and fought near the end of the war. And that history kind of goes through my family all the way to my parents, who actually met in the Army. And then I served for about a decade as a combat engineer here in Calgary. And so that military reverence and just kind of that understanding of that service was really important. And when we started losing some of our troops in Afghanistan, that kind of hit home, because here's some people that we actually know that gave their lives in service. And there's a bit of a gap between the name on a headstone and who that person really was. And that was really solidified when I went overseas to France, Belgium, Holland, and you'd see these grave sites of 3,000 or more headstones. And it just leaves you pondering, like, what was the story of that individual? And it was in one of those cemeteries in Holland that I played a flute, Amazing Grace, for a World War II soldier at his brother's grave. And after I played that flute, I was talking to him about his brother and the experiences. And that's when it really landed with me, is we have to do something to make sure that these stories are being passed through the generations.
Well, and that's the thing. These stories are being passed through the generations, but only by word of mouth, handed down, or saving the mementos, that sort of thing. And I want to ask you in a minute about how the app would work. But let's go to the phone lines. We have Gord on the line. Hello, Gord.
Hi there.
Hi. What are your veteran memories?
Well, it's interesting because my dad fought in the First World War, not the Second, but the First World War. He was 15 when he enlisted as a Métis man, and already had three brothers that were already in theater overseas. Of the family, one of them, my dad was wounded in the Battle of Cambrai. He was wounded in the leg by machine gun fire. One of his brothers was gassed at Passchendaele, and another one of his brothers was killed at Vimy Ridge. And his third brother survived and had no physical harm and came back home. So for me, my father died when I was only about 4 months old. So I obviously did not know my father. So Remembrance Day becomes for me a very poignant moment and emotional one in terms of remembering my father and his brothers.
Yes. Well, Gord, thank you very much for sharing that story. Very, very meaningful. And yeah, it really brings emotions to the surface, doesn't it, on this day?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your call.
Okay.
So, Ryan, a story like Gord has to tell that involves several members of the family and goes back such a long way. How does your app work where it might aid in preserving a story like Gord's?
Well, and I love that story, and Gord, I love hearing that emotion. You can see how important that is to you. Yeah, and our app is is designed to, and what it does is for the sites that are on it, we've mapped out these sites with our partners, whether that's Commonwealth War Graves Commission or other partners. And what it does is it commemorates the individuals at these sites. And so we have over 100 cemeteries around the world right now on our app. And so that goes from France, Belgium, Holland. In Calgary, we just put 2,000 veterans and war dead from the Commonwealth training, air training facilities and such. And so those individuals are commemorated. And with our partners, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, if you have a loved one who was killed during the First or Second World War, they're going to be commemorated through them, and they're one of our partners. And so that's a way that we can get information up to our app. And that way, it's becoming a way to engage with those memories in a different way, using the medium of the phone, which a lot of youth and the current generation is using as well.
So this is an app someone would have on their phone and scan like a headstone marker and be connected with data in some way, or?
Yeah. We were out in Normandy for the 80th anniversary of D-Day, for example, and we covered almost every Canadian soldier who was killed in that conflict, actually any Allied soldier that was killed in that conflict. And so if you were walking through the cemetery and you just were curious, you could hold your phone up to the grave with the app. It would read the story, the name, and bring you the story of that individual, that soldier, and then any information that we would have on them. But if you're looking for someone in the cemetery, which is actually really challenging to do on these sites, it's very hard to find people. We have the GPS locations of each of those individuals. And so you can type their name in and be guided to the grave on the site as well.
I see. Well, we're hoping to hear from our listeners wanting to share some stories about a grandparent or a great-grandparent, or perhaps you visited those vast cemeteries overseas. What was your experience like, and what did you bring back from that? Or do you remember a story that someone in your family has handed down to you? Or did perhaps the veterans in your family not speak of the war? I think that was very common. I know in my own family, I have some letters from my granny's brother, so I guess my great uncle, who was at Dunkirk, and the letters though are so cheerful. It's funny, right? Because of course how dreadful it was there being in Dunkirk, but these letters that were over a series of months fighting in France. Just that everything was all right and the people were interesting. They're such relics of bravery and not wanting to worry the people back home.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't even imagine just the way the soldiers would just put a front on and want to protect their loved ones from what they were actually experiencing.
Now, you say you're a former reservist. What other connections do you have to military or family that played a role in the wars? You're saying it's pretty extensive in your family.
Yeah, so my great-grandfathers fought both of them fought in the First World War. So that was Archibald Cripps and George Oldacre. They, like I said, Archibald actually joined out of Winnipeg with the 200th Battalion. And what's actually beautiful is when he returned, he had bought a wedding ring for his wife. And it's the same wedding ring my wife wears now today. And it's always a little piece that we get to see of him. Further to that, my grandfather, he was too young to fight in the Second World War, but he was part of a group that would pull airmen out of the English Channel. And so they were going around in motorboats to recover these airmen that were downed. And then he joined the Canadian military later and became a signaller with the Canadian Armed Forces and had a long career there. And then, of course, my parents met in the Army. And so the joke is that I owe my life to the Army.
Well, I was speaking to Dr. Bridges just a little while ago about a healthcare report that's come out about the needs of veterans and so on. And she was mentioning that most veterans now are those who have served after 1954. So a lot of our veterans of the First and Second World War are gone. And with them go the stories, I suppose, unless we get them documented. So in your view, how important is that documentation?
It's hugely important, Lori. It's actually been quite an experience as we put a lot of these cemeteries up, and just the lack of information that we have for these individuals. And our what we're trying to do is give the stories back to these soldiers.
Yeah.
So we're deploying things like AI to give a little bit of context. And so what it will do is read these sparse records and put that information together in just a meaningful small bio. But it's actually very sad that that's all we have
Yeah.
for many of these people. A lot of them didn't have wives or children to carry on their memory. They're usually the uncles
Right.
and such. And so, and some of these family lines ended with these individuals.
Well, a lot
And
of,
so,
yeah, they were so young.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so just trying to do our best to, like I said, give these stories back, but also create an opportunity for people to share those stories and preserve them in a different way.
And find a way to search for them. Give us a call, 204-780-0893. If you've looked for your relatives or have stories to share. We have Cynthia on the line. Hi, Cynthia.
Hi there. My grandfather's brother served in World War II, and while D-Day was going on in France, he was going up the boot of Italy against, crack German, battle-hardened troops.
Yeah.
With the British Eighth Army, and the Battle of Ortona, which was known as the mini Stalingrad of that, part of Italy. And I was lucky enough back like in 1990 or so to find a record of him that he was killed in December of 1944, and he's buried in Italy.
Oh.
And other than Hong Kong, which I wanted to visit before the turnover, that was another place I would have liked to have been able to travel to.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Cynthia, for sharing. It's so interesting to hear these stories so long ago, but they still seem pretty fresh. Thank you. And we're going to go stay with the phone lines. We have Colleen on the line. Hi, Colleen.
Hello?
Hello. Hi, Colleen.
Hello. I just wanted to explain how my dad actually did put his memories down. He served in the Royal Canadian Navy Volunteer Service during the Second World War, and the book is called His Memories Can Survive, HMCS. So he was a signalman in the Navy, and he wrote some simple stories about his time in the Navy. He did 14 crossings between Newfoundland and Londonderry. And I'm just very proud for him for doing that. He went over to the 60th anniversary of the Battle of the Atlantic, which was held in Londonderry. There's a Naval Memorial Trust that's headquartered in Halifax, and he went over there for that. He had a very hard time breathing because of asbestos in the bunks.
Oh, no.
But, he made it till 83, and I'm very proud of him for doing that. So I'm sorry most of them are gone. I don't think a lot of them talked about it. I agree. And anyway, he was from Calgary, Alberta, and when Ryan...
Hello? Oh, looks like we've lost Colleen. Oh, that's too bad. Well, Colleen, I'm sorry you've disappeared into the ether there, but thank you for sharing that story, and it's great that you are the one carrying it on. So we'll return to the phone lines. We have Dora. Hi, Dora.
Hi.
What would you like to talk about?
Well, I don't know that the general population of Manitoba or Canada know about a book called Geographical Names of Manitoba, which an author put together a book of honoring people that have served in the armed forces during the Second World War. And they have been honored by having, as I said, geographical points named after them.
Oh, and did you know any of the names yourself?
Yes, and my brother, I'm talking about my brother.
Oh.
And he has a lake named after him way up north in Manitoba. It's called Paul's Lake.
Paul's Lake. Isn't that nice? Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Dora, for bringing that to our attention. And what's it called again? What's the title?
Geographical Names of Manitoba.
Geographical Names of Manitoba. Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Give us a call, 204-780-0893, and let us know what family stories you have. These tales are so poignant and so interesting that they are still preserved, as when we were speaking with our callers as well. And, of course, Ryan has an app that can help keep those memories in order, find out more about them, and preserve them. So tell me, Ryan, we often hear about veterans not wanting to talk about the experience, as has been mentioned. What's your experience been with that in trying to expand your database and get these stories preserved?
Yeah, and you can imagine very difficult for many veterans to go revisit that very traumatic experience. And one of the things we're trying to do is really create that opportunity to make sure that's carried on. A lot of the stories and many of the individuals we're covering right now are actually war dead. We did just put our 1 millionth biography on here just this last week. And just trying to encourage people to share those stories, like even, just kind of Cynthia calling in, I'm interested. We do have Monte Cassino on the app. We have Anzio and Salerno. These are major Canadian cemeteries, Canadian British cemeteries. And I'm just interested to open up the app and search his name and see if you can find him. And if you can, share that with the Commonwealth War Graves Commission forevermore.
Yeah.
The stories that they're preserving there, and it will get right onto our app once they get that information.
Well, and as you mentioned, this is where AI kind of gets some good publicity in that it can cobble together some absolutely useful information, because there's just so much out there. And it's like, as you say, when you stand in front of all those tombstones, imagine that in terms of information. I want to play a clip that came in on the listener line.
I think it's very ironic and unfortunate that on Remembrance Day, we're not remembering what's happening as we speak, as this show is going to air in Gaza and in the Ukraine, and that our government is supplying arms, supplying military support and pledging military support to both these conflicts. In Gaza, not so openly, but for the Ukraine, very, very openly. And I think that's extremely inappropriate. And I'm wondering what future generations are going to think of these conflicts and what he will remember about them and about our Western governments and the citizens of those countries, what their responsibility is for what's happening as we speak. I hope we remember that. Now, what's happening now, 5 minutes ago, an hour ago.
That was a call that came in on the listener line. Let's return to the live phone lines. We have Jane on the line. Hi, Jane.
Good afternoon.
What would you like to mention?
It's really just a memory. I was adopted in England back in 1966, and my mother and father both had interesting war stories. My father fought against the Japanese in Burma, and he was in a trench, and shrapnel came over, and the two gentlemen either side of him fell onto him, and he was saved. He had a lot of shrapnel in his head, and he was transported back by boat to England, and met my mum, who was a nurse, and the rest is history. They got married, and it's a beautiful story. And also my mum, she lived in Coventry in England, and she was there nursing during the Coventry Blitz.
Oh.
I don't know if anyone knows about that,
Sure.
but they got hit really bad. And my mum had some friends, nursing friends, and they went home one evening. And the next morning she came onto her street, and hers was literally the only house left standing. They had jumped under tables, and a couple of her best friends, also nurses, died. And On this Remembrance Day, like the last caller said, it's very poignant to no matter where you are in the world, to remember the sacrifices people made for us to be living, a free life today. And with all the conflicts going on in the world today, we need to remember, because if we don't remember, we don't have a history. That's my story.
Well, thank you, Jane, and thank you for kind of connecting then and now. As you say, you've kept that story alive, and you realize the poignancy of it, and also just how it connects to if we're ever going to find some peace. Thank you very much for that call. And Ryan, before I let you go, how have people reacted? What are the responses that you've been getting from families who want to learn more about their family histories and use the app?
Yeah, we've been having a really great positive response. I think it really shows that there is a need for this. I was going to say an appetite, but I really do think there's a need for this. I think it's really important that we continue to remember and practice that empathy and gratitude for these individuals. Yeah. And what we've seen is a lot of people reaching out, looking, how do we share the stories? We have, and one of the things that gets me a lot is people asking us like, hey, I tried the app and it's not at this cemetery and that cemetery. And that's the one thing that, we're really hoping to increase its use and where it is available. And that's, I think, probably the thing we struggle with now most is, we're a small business trying to do our best to get as much as we can. And we really rely on our partners to do that.
Well, and having you on the show and hearing about the app it sounds like a good way to find out more about the veterans and the stories and so on. But it's also been great how it's brought some of our listeners to give us a call and share their stories and their memories. And it was just so fantastic to hear the emotion in people's voices and the pride in their voices. I'm thinking particularly of Jane that we were just talking to and really cherishing these stories. So thank you very much, Ryan, for joining us on Radio Noon.
Thanks for having me, Lori.
Bye-bye. That's Ryan Mullins. He is the co-founder of Memory Anchor, an app that preserves the stories of veterans.
Whether it's breaking news from around the world, across the country, or in your own hometown, it's all at your fingertips on the CBC News app. Get the top stories from where you live under the local tab, or watch video clips, live events, and the national on your smartphone or tablet. Get all the news you want, when you want it, where you want it, with the CBC News app. Download the app for free today.
This is a proposed corridor for multiple pipeline projects.
You're crossing our territory on two ends of your pipeline. Who gave you permission?
Pipelines break of the pipelines would destroy water and everything in it.
They got to come through us first.
Is this an immediate evacuation order for all Coastal GasLink employees? I feel like we are at war. It's just all been building up to this point.
Yenta on The Passionate Eye. Watch free on CBC Gem.
You're listening to Radio Noon, and thank you very much for joining us on this Remembrance Day. Kind of a sober day to think and remember. And I want to say thanks very much to our technician, May McKillop, our director, Wendy Parker, our YouTube live stream hero, Kevin Nipatebo. And thank you to all the listeners who called in to share their very moving stories. We really appreciate it. And so think some good thoughts and enjoy a little bit of sunshine on this November 11th. I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.